Um, well, it happened when I was in high school. In 2011, I was uh, in my, what year is that? Sophomore year, the end of my sophomore year of high school. It was exhilarating. I was never interested in politics at all before it happened, and then suddenly, before any of this happened, I wanted to be a neurosurgeon, and now I'm studying political affairs. So, career-wise, my life changed because I became so much more interested in what's going on in my country. But day-to-day life, I mean, while everything was happening, yes, there were curfews because like the security situation wasn't great, and we had to like be everybody had to be home by like sunset, things like that. I had my like high school exams at the time; they were postponed. But now things are getting a lot more back to normal. The economy is not great, so that's affecting day-to-day life. There's a lot of inflation and stuff. But other than that, in terms of like movement and travel and everything, things are getting relatively back to normal. So, I know about. In terms of the political goals, I think definitely a failure. But I also think that there are some unnoticed changes in terms of people's culture and people's political awareness that were really good. A lot more people are now just talking about regular political developments than they would have 5, 6 years ago. And media and culture is a lot more creative and a lot more willing to push boundaries now than they were. So I think that's a success.
I'm not really sure. I think that the U.S. has always kind of had negative views of the Arab world. Um, I do know that for me personally, it made me more skeptical of whether they are able to have democracy or self-rule as a people.
What?
Because I think that Islamist as a political ideology is kind of cancerous for any country to have. And I think that the Arab Spring kind of showed that secular liberal democracy doesn't really have a lot of ability to flourish on its own without at least some sort of coalition with more Islamist partners.
I think the possibilities for the revival of the Arab Spring at the moment look very limited. What we've actually seen is the reversal of the revolutionary movements taking place across the region and the reconsolidation of authoritarian rule. So I think the prospects for a repeat of what happened in 2011 are unfortunately few and far between at the moment. I think the biggest change that emerged from the Arab Spring is not the actual success of the revolutionary movements themselves, but the biggest change is the transformation that was had in people's minds, in people's attitudes about the possibilities for change. What's been really exciting over the past 5 years is, despite the very disappointing outcomes of the revolution, there has been a real revival, a real resurgence in confidence. If you look at activists, if you look at civil society organizations, they're doing things in countries like Syria that were previously unthinkable. They're taking their lives into their own hands, often in extremely difficult circumstances. So if I think there is one thing good that's come out of the Arab uprisings, it's this resurgence of confidence. Clearly, if you look at the balance sheet as a whole, there hasn't been a successful regime change. There hasn't been a transition to democracy. But if that's the bar we're setting it by, then I think we're setting the standard just too high. If you look at the changes that are made at a micro level, in terms of how people handle their own lives, in terms of the responsibility they take for themselves in a context of chaos, I think at this micro level you see much more positive, optimistic changes. And for that reason, I'm not completely pessimistic about the future. So even if these micro level changes do not amount to some macro level transformation, I think it will be impossible for the regimes to turn the clock back to where they were in the early 2000s, and certainly not to where they were in the 1980s or 1970s. It's going to be impossible to reconstruct the same system of quite brittle authoritarianism, partly because of the impact of new technologies, partly because of the impact of this new confidence that people have in their own lives, and partly to do with the weakening of state structures across the region. So we may not see a kind of a movement towards full democracy. I think that is still very far off.